My name is Imogen Truss, and I turned 18 yesterday, but there was no celebration. This morning, my father walked into the kitchen, slid a thick stack of legal papers across the table, and said, "Just sign it, Imogen. Let the family handle the money." I did not touch the pen. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye and asked, "Which family? The one that had a lawyer draft a petition to declare me incompetent?" His face instantly twisted into an expression I had never seen before, a mix of sheer panic and cold fury. For 4 long months, my parents and my younger sister had been secretly plotting to steal the $3 million my grandparents left me. They had patience and a forged power of attorney, but they forgot the one thing my grandfather taught me to read first: the fine print. Before I tell you how the rest of that morning played out, take a quick second to hit like, subscribe, and tell me your city and local time in the comments. I really do want to know where you are listening from. To make sense of this betrayal, we have to go back to the greenhouse behind my grandmother Cora's craftsman house. During the summer, I turned 12. It was the warmest, safest place I knew. Every morning, the glass panes would fog up, and the air inside smelled of rich, wet soil and sweet citrus blossoms. My grandmother had a Meyer lemon tree she grew from a tiny cutting the year my father was born. She trusted me to prune it, letting me make mistakes and learn from them, without ever telling me I was too young to hold the shears. One hot afternoon, I asked her if she was worried I would cut the wrong branch and ruin everything. She just wiped her hands on her apron, looked at me, and said, "The lemon tree does not ask permission to bloom, Imogen." I was only 12, so I thought she was talking about simple gardening. She was not. My grandparents were the only ones who ever treated my questions as if they actually mattered. At my house, asking a question was considered a major problem. But in that quiet greenhouse, it was a doorway. She taught me how to tell when roots were drowning versus when they were thirsty, showing me how closely those two conditions resembled each other. "You do not soften for people, and you should not," she told me once while snipping a dead shoot. I held on to those words. Back then, I had no idea my grandparents were already meeting with a lawyer downtown. They were building a legal fortress around my future because they saw a dark side of my father that I was too young to see. In the front room, my grandfather August had a heavy desk with a brass lamp. It had a green glass shade and a pull chain that made a satisfying click when you turned it on. Under that green light, he taught me about numbers, not just school arithmetic, but real money. He would spread the financial section of the newspaper across the leather blotter, making me read corporate balance sheets out loud until I understood exactly what a liability was and how quickly debts could swallow someone whole. Grandpa would draw curves with his fountain pen to show me how compound interest grows, watching the ink bend upward off the page. He would tap the paper and say, "Most people skim the top line and just sign. The real story is always in the fine print at the bottom." To a 12-year-old, it felt like a game, but he was dead serious. One night, my father walked in to call us for dinner, saw the financial sheets, and frowned, asking why he was filling my head with all of this. My grandfather did not look up. He clicked the green lamp off, then on, and said, "Because someday someone will hand her a contract and smile while they do it." He stared directly at my father, and the air turned icy. Later, I saw my father secretly taking photos of those files with his phone. I kept quiet back then, filing it away with all the other unsettling things I could not prove. That same night, my grandfather gave me a piece of advice that stayed with me forever. People who underestimate you are doing half your work for you. I never forgot those words, and eventually, neither would my dad. In our home, my younger sister Sloane was the sun, and the rest of us just orbited around her. She was 3 years younger and perfectly compliant, smiling on cue and never asking where the money went. But I did ask, which automatically made me the difficult child. When I was 14, I spotted a credit card charge on the counter and pointed out to my mother that the $900 charge did not match the business lunch my father claimed he had. "That is a $900 dinner, Dad," I said. "You told Mom it was just a client lunch." The dining room went dead silent. My mother set her fork down slowly, as if she were disarming a weapon, and hissed, "Imogen, that is so disrespectful." To them, asking a question was a direct attack. Two concepts so deeply welded together in our household that no one could separate them. My father ran a small wealth advisory firm, the kind with gold lettering on the glass door. He wore professional competence like an expensive suit. But that night, when his phone buzzed, his jaw clenched hard. He hurried to the garage to take the call, and I overheard 2 words before the door shut. Compliance review. I did not understand what a compliance review was back then, only that it clearly terrified my father. My mother immediately smoothed things over the way she always did, using a forced, bright voice and a tightening grip. "Your father works very hard for this family," she warned, staring pointedly at me while ignoring Sloane entirely. I just nodded and finished my dinner in silence. I had already learned that in our house, being right out loud cost far more than being wrong quietly. My grandfather passed away when I was 15, on a quiet Tuesday when his heart simply stopped arguing. At his wake, before the coffee even got cold, my father and uncle were already whispering by the window about the inheritance. 2 years later, my grandmother followed him. Near the end, my grandmother was frail, but completely clear-eyed. She gripped my wrist with the same firm intention she used to hold those pruning shears. "Do not let anyone tell you who you are, Imogen," she whispered. "They will try. They always try." I promised her I would not. 8 months later, as my 18th birthday approached, the house felt like a held breath. My parents suddenly started acting unusually gentle. One evening, they sat me down with a thick folder of legal paperwork. "These are just so we can keep helping you with college fees and your health insurance once you turn 18, my mother said softly, sliding a pen to me. "Boring adult stuff." Still raw with grief, I signed exactly where the sticky flags told me to. I only skimmed the top lines. I ignored the fine print at the bottom, the exact trap my grandfather had warned me about, because I desperately wanted to trust my parents, and I was tired of being the difficult one. 4 months later, I would discover what those pages actually were, realizing their sudden kindness was just bait. But that night, I capped the pen, thanked them, and went to bed feeling like a real part of the family. That warm feeling did not survive the winter. On a cold Thursday in February, 3 months before my birthday, an unknown number called me. "Imogen, my name is Patricia Lindquist. I was your grandparents' trustee." Her voice was flat and precise, like a judge delivering a final verdict she already knew was correct. She asked me to meet her downtown, alone, so I went to her office on a Saturday morning. Patricia was 63 years old, dressed in a sharp gray suit, possessing the deep calm of someone who had spent decades watching wealthy families tear themselves apart over cash. She slid a folder toward me. "Your grandparents established a trust 6 years ago," she explained. "A brokerage portfolio, the old Craftsman house, and a rental property on Delmare, totaling about $3.4 million. You are the sole beneficiary, and according to the terms, it distributes to you outright on your 18th birthday. I sat frozen. Outright? I asked. Meaning I control it? She nodded and folded her hands. Yes, which is why I called you. Your father and uncle have been digging around, she said as the fluorescent lamp hummed overhead. They want to know if they can be named managers of your trust. Your grandfather left explicit instructions to warn you if they ever started asking questions. He was very specific about your father. When I asked her why, she looked at me with deep pity. Because your grandfather said your father reads people like account balances. He decides what they are worth to him, and then he collects. Then she dropped a bombshell that turned my world upside down. Imogen, there is a durable power of attorney on file with your father's name on it. Did you sign one? My stomach completely dropped. I think I might have, I whispered, horrified. I raced home, tearing through my closet to find my copy of that college and insurance folder. Sitting on my bedroom floor, I turned every single page. Tuition authorization, healthcare proxy, 2 pages of insurance consent, and then, hidden at the very back, a page I had initialed without looking. It was a durable power of attorney, granting my father full authority over my finances effective the moment I turned 18. My hands turned ice cold. I immediately called Saul Berman, my grandfather's accountant of 30 years. We met at a local diner, and I watched his face fall as he read the page twice. He looked up at me and sighed. This is a durable financial power of attorney, kiddo, and it is as broad as a barn door. With this, your father can move money in your name the day you turn 18. Saul set the page down, studying me closely. There is more. Your father's practice is under a FINRA examination. I do the books for 2 of his former clients, and their statements stopped matching the custodian's records a year ago. I asked what that meant. Saul stirred his coffee. It means money that should be in client accounts is missing, and someone is covering the gap. If they find it, he is barred. If it is bad enough, he is indicted. In that second, the whole picture clicked. The $900 dinner, the garage phone calls, his sudden tenderness. He did not want to help me. He needed my inheritance to fill a hole before the auditors caught him. That night, my hands shook as I texted Patricia. I found the power of attorney. We need to talk before my birthday. She replied in less than a minute. Good. Bring Saul. When we met, Patricia brought in a litigator named Bryn Holloway, a 34-year-old, fast-talking lawyer with the energy of someone who loved a fair fight way more than a sure victory. The 3 of them laid out the entire problem on a whiteboard like a chessboard. Here is where you are exposed, Bryn said. On your birthday, the trust distributes to you outright. The second it lands in your accounts, that durable power of attorney lets your father move it. We have to close that window before it opens. The plan had 2 moves, and both had to happen at the exact same minute. Your grandfather built a continuance provision into the trust, Patricia said. It gives me discretion as trustee. I can keep the assets in a protective trust for you rather than handing them over, if you consent. So first, instead of taking the money outright, I would consent to have Patricia decant my entire inheritance into an irrevocable protective trust she controlled. This locked it down so neither my father nor any power of attorney could reach it. Second, I would sign a written revocation of the power of attorney, and Bryn would send formal notices to the bank and brokerage the instant it became effective. 12:01 a.m. on the morning of your birthday, Bryn said. Not a minute later. If he instructs them before our revocation lands, this gets ugly. I asked the obvious question. Why not just confront them now? Patricia answered without hesitation. Because if you warn him, he will just find another road. Your grandfather did not hire me to negotiate with your father. He hired me to lock the door. I asked if there was a risk they would fight back. Bryn smiled as if she had been waiting for that question. Almost certainly. People like your dad do not lose quietly. She capped her marker. But we do not hide, and we do not ambush. We lock the door, and we turn on all the lights. I drove home that night with the plan folded up in my chest. I even smiled at my father across the dinner table while he told me he was throwing me a big 18th birthday party. I want to be honest with you for a second because I know how this sounds. For most of my life, I believed the rule that family does not do this to family. I thought blood meant something. I held on to that belief even while sitting in a lawyer's office, planning how to protect myself from my own father. If you have ever found out that someone you trusted had you sign something you did not understand, a form, a loan, or a formality, tell me about it in the comments. I read them. And if this is hitting close to home, hit subscribe, because what they tried the next morning is the part I still cannot believe. The week before my birthday, my father started circling. He found me at the kitchen table one night and pulled out a chair with the careful warmth of a man about to sell something. Can we talk, kiddo? Father to daughter. I closed my laptop and waited. Your grandparents left you a lot, he said. More than most adults know how to handle, let alone someone your age. I have managed portfolios for 20 years. Let me carry that weight for you. Just at first, so you can be a kid a little longer. It was a good pitch. Warm, reasonable, almost loving. I would have believed every word of it a year ago. I can carry it myself, Dad, I said. I read a balance sheet faster than you think. His warmth cooled by a degree. You are grieving, Imogen. You are not thinking straight. Grief makes people do reckless things with money. There it was, the first brick in the wall he was building. The word reckless, laid down on purpose. I kept my voice level as I replied, I am thinking straighter than I have in months. He studied me, recalculating, and I watched him decide I was a harder sale than he had budgeted for. Just think about it, he said, standing. Do not do anything impulsive. After he left, I sat there with my grandfather's voice in my head, clear as the click of that brass lamp. People who underestimate you are doing half your work for you. My father had just spent an entire conversation building the case that I was unstable, and he had no idea he was building it where I could see every brick. He thought he was managing me, but he was narrating his own strategy to the one person it was aimed at. I went upstairs and texted Bryn. He is laying groundwork, calling me reckless and grieving. She wrote back, let him document everything. But my mother worked a different angle, and hers was quieter and worse. My mother started seeding the family with a specific story. I caught the edge of it at a cousin's christening. She was by the dessert table with my Aunt Helen, her voice pitched soft and concerned. We are just so worried about Imogen lately. She has not been herself since Mom passed. She has been so volatile. Volatile. The same family of words as reckless and unstable. Chosen and placed on purpose. She was building a character, a girl who could not be trusted with money. I did not make a scene. I waited until we were back home and she was unloading the dishwasher. I leaned in the doorway. Are you building a file on me, Mom? She did not even flinch. I do not know what you mean. You told Aunt Helen I am volatile.
You have been telling people I am not myself.
She straightened up with a plate in her hand, giving me the wounded look she had perfected over decades. I am your mother. I am allowed to be concerned. From the next room, Sloane's voice drifted in, careless and certain. Mom said you would try to keep all the money for yourself. The whole architecture of it landed on me at once. They had not just lied to me. They had told my little sister a version of me that was selfish, unstable, and greedy, and she had swallowed it whole. To Sloane, I was not her sister anymore. I was a threat. Is that what she told you? I asked Sloane, keeping my voice even. She shrugged, already on her phone. My mother set the plate down with a click that sounded exactly like a closing door. Nobody is building anything, Imogen, she said. You are proving our point right now. She was not wrong that it was a point. She was just wrong about whose point it was. The night before my birthday, I went out to the greenhouse. The craftsman house still sat empty in the trust, and I had a key. I needed to be somewhere that smelled like my grandmother instead of my mother's careful poison. I carried my grandfather's brass lamp out there, set it on the potting bench, and clicked it on. Green light pooled over the soil and the Meyer lemon tree she had grown from a cutting. I checked the leaves the way she taught me. Thirsty, but not drowning. I watered it carefully. I did not cry, though it was close. What I felt in that moment was harder and far cleaner than grief. It was the specific fury of being narrated as crazy by the people who had spent 18 years deciding I was nobody. They told my sister I was greedy. They told my aunt I was unstable. They had built an entire woman out of lies and handed her my name. I sat with the lamp in the tree, letting the anger settle into something quiet and usable. They underestimated me. Good. I checked my email. Patricia had sent the full package, the new trust agreement, the revocation of power of attorney, and the notice letters ready for Bryn to fire off at midnight. Everything was flagged, everything explained, and everything was waiting on my single signature. I read it all twice, the way my grandfather taught me, all the way to the small print at the bottom. And the small print was clean. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the green light a while longer, the lemon tree quiet beside me, blooming on its own schedule, asking permission from no one. In a few hours, I would be 18. Soon after that, my family would discover that the difficult daughter had read every single page. At 11:50 that night, I sat at my desk with the brass lamp glowing beside my laptop and opened the video call. Patricia appeared first, then Bryn, both of them up at midnight like it was nothing, both of them ready. When the clock turns, Patricia said, you will be an adult, and the trust would normally land in your lap. We are not going to let it land where they can reach it. She walked me through it one last time. At 12:01 a.m., under the trust's continuance provision, I would consent and Patricia would decant my entire inheritance into a new, irrevocable, protective trust. She would control it as trustee, and I would hold it only as the beneficiary. This meant my father, or any power of attorney over me, would be reaching for a door with no handle on their side. Then I would sign the revocation of the durable power of attorney, and Bryn would transmit notice to the brokerage's compliance desk and the bank. After tonight, Bryn said, any instruction your father gives gets flagged against a revoked authority. They won't move a single dollar. The laptop clock turned over, 12:01. I picked up my grandfather's fountain pen and signed. Signing that revocation felt like a physical battle. the cold metal of the pen heavy in my hand, almost like my grandfather was there, pressing his hand on my shoulder to keep me steady. Bryn's screen flashed as she fired off the digital notices. Time-stamped 12:03 a.m., both the brokerage and the bank had received them. Patricia gave me the closest thing to a smile I had ever seen from her, telling me it was finally over. I was now the beneficiary of a trust no one in my family could ever touch. Downstairs, my father slept soundly beside a plan that had died at midnight without his knowledge. He would only find out at market open. I put the rest together later from brokerage logs and my sister's confession. But this is what was happening across town while I signed. Across town, inside the dimly lit home office of Curtis Vance, my father and his old associate sat huddled over two distinct sets of legal documents. Curtis was the kind of lawyer who notarized papers, filed them away, and never asked a single question he did not want to know the answer to. The first document was a set of brokerage instructions. My father planned to submit them the moment the market opened, using a power of attorney to siphon my entire inheritance into an account under his sole control. The second document was far more sinister. An emergency petition for a conservatorship over me. It claimed I was a grief-stricken 18-year-old, too financially reckless to handle a multi-million-dollar estate. It was their insurance policy. If the money moved smoothly, they would bury it. But if I dared to fight back, they would use it to paint me as completely unstable to a judge. Curtis told my father to file the petition at 9 a.m. when the courthouse opened and to move the funds at market open. A belt and suspenders approach. My mother had already coached Sloan on what to say, that I was acting erratic, talking about the inheritance strangely. They had built a machine with a part for everyone, but they never factored in the timestamp. The power of attorney they relied on was dead at 12:03 that morning, and the money had a new trustee whose name was definitely not Trask. My parents slept and woke up with absolute certainty, believing they held every single card. It was exactly the state of foolish confidence my grandfather warned me about when I was 12, sitting at his desk, watching them with a quiet smile. The birthday party was the next afternoon, a trap disguised as a festive celebration. Under the banner of my 18th birthday and a family meeting about Grandma and Grandpa's estate, my mother invited everyone: aunts, uncles, cousins, Aunt Helen, and a few neighbors. There were balloons, a sheet cake, and a gold banner reading, "Happy 18th." Underneath it all was a malicious plan. The moment I walked in, I read the room. My father was way too relaxed. My mother was overly attentive, touching my shoulder and calling me sweetheart in a voice she only saved for audiences. Sloan wouldn't even meet my eyes. Curtis Vance was standing there in a sport coat, which meant trouble. You do not bring your family lawyer to a birthday party unless you expect to force someone to sign something. Aunt Helen sat near the window, watching the room with the same sharp stillness I recognized from my grandmother. She caught my eye once, holding my gaze a beat too long, as if trying to tell me something she couldn't say out loud. I grabbed a paper cup of punch, stayed near the wall, and waited for my family to make their first move. I knew they would. My father kept nervously checking his phone. I knew exactly why. He was waiting for confirmation from the brokerage that the transfer had gone through, a confirmation that should have arrived at market open. Every single time he glanced down and saw nothing, his smile became a little more fixed and forced. Meanwhile, the cake sat uncut. My mother circled the room, praising my virtues to relatives in a way she never had before, building me up so she could tear me down on cue. I sipped my punch, letting them set their own stage. When the room was full, my father tapped a fork against his glass, and the family went quiet, turning toward him. Before we cut the cake, he announced in a warm, easy voice that my grandparents had left our family a real gift. He claimed that, as a family, we had decided the responsible thing was to let him manage my inheritance while I found my feet. "We've decided," he said. I hadn't decided a single thing. He looked at me with the practiced fondness of a man who had rehearsed this over and over, saying, "Right, sweetheart? You know this is what is best." Every face in the room turned to me, and I felt that heavy, familiar pressure to smile, shrink, and make things easy. Instead, I set my cup down. "I never agreed to that, Dad," I said. A few relatives shifted, but my father's smile held as he claimed I was just overwhelmed by the big day. "I am not overwhelmed," I said, clear and level. "And I know exactly why you need $3 million by this quarter." The room's temperature dropped instantly. My uncle stopped chewing, and my father's jaw flexed. Imogen. I asked him how his FINRA exam was going, the one about client accounts that stopped matching the custodian's records. Behind me, a cousin whispered. Curtis Vance set down his plate slowly. For a split second, my father's mask came loose, revealing a flicker of pure calculation. People who underestimate you are doing half your work for you. He had spent a week telling everyone I was a reckless, grieving child, and now I stood in his trap, completely calm, holding the one fact he needed buried in front of the relatives whose respect he lived on. He built the audience. I just used it. My mother stepped into the silence on cue, tears arriving on schedule. "See," she cried, her voice trembling. "This is what we have been dealing with. She claims I've been paranoid since my grandmother died, accusing them of awful things. She said they were only trying to protect me." It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She turned my composure into a mental symptom, and my accuracy into paranoia. A few of the older relatives softened, nodding the way people do when a crying mother says she is only trying to help. I didn't raise my voice. Doing so was the exact gift she was fishing for. "You are not trying to protect me, Mom," I said. "You filed a petition at the courthouse to have me declared incompetent, and you did it before you even sang happy birthday to me." A different kind of quiet fell. The kind where people start doing the math. Aunt Helen's head came up sharply, and my mother's tears paused for a half-second. It was a clear crack in her performance. She stammered that they were only exploring options. I looked at Curtis, noting they hired him to draft a conservatorship petition and a power of attorney. "You tricked me into signing them in a folder of college forms while I was grieving Grandma," I said. "I have both documents, and so does my attorney." Curtis stood up quickly, as if his chair had gotten hot, muttering that this was out of hand while reaching for his coat. Aunt Helen spoke for the first time, quiet and cold, looking straight at my mother. "Renata, is that true? Did you file to take her inheritance?" My mother turned to her sister with her usual wounded look, ready to deploy it. But for once, it didn't take. Helen grew up with that look and knew exactly what it covered. My father abandoned his warmth entirely since it wasn't working. He crossed the room, lowering his voice so only the front half of the party could hear, playing out his own hushed theater. "You want to do this the hard way? Fine, we go to court," my father muttered. "A judge looks at an 18-year-old with no job, no degree, sitting on $3 million, grieving, making wild accusations against her own parents. You think you walk out of that with control? You'll have a conservator by summer, and it'll be me." It was meant to land like a fist. I had spent a week being told I was reckless and unstable, and this was the threat their whole campaign had been building toward in front of the family. They wanted to watch me crumble. I didn't crumble. "A court needs evidence I'm incapacitated, Dad," I said. "You don't have any. What you have is a power of attorney I revoked at 12:01 this morning, and a brokerage that has had formal notice since 12:03. His face went completely still. "And that inheritance you are planning to move at market open isn't even in my name anymore," I said. "It's in an irrevocable trust, and the trustee isn't a Trask." For a moment, he didn't even breathe. Then he pulled out his phone, turned away from the room, and dialed the brokerage. I'd been waiting all afternoon for him to find out the hard way. The family watched him walk to the corner with the phone pressed to his ear. They saw his shoulders slump as someone on the other end politely explained that there was absolutely nothing he could do. Standing in that room while my own mother told a dozen relatives I was mentally unwell, just so she could take my money, did something to me. It is a betrayal that I'm still trying to untangle to this very day. I didn't get loud. I decided long ago that my calm was the one thing they couldn't take, lie about, or sign away. If you have ever had to stay steady while a room was told a false version of you, I want to hear about it in the comments. Hit subscribe if you are with me, because when this reaches a courtroom, it all comes apart for them. Later, I pieced together his brokerage call from the compliance logs Bryn pulled in Discovery, but the shape of it was simple. At market open that morning, before the party even started, my father had called and given instructions to transfer my full portfolio using that power of attorney. He actually believed he was going to walk away with everything, completely unaware that he had been legally locked out hours before he even woke up. Have you ever watched someone realize their entire world has collapsed? I watched my father clutch the phone, his knuckles white. The representative had put him on hold, and when they returned, they told him the truth. The account had been retitled to an irrevocable trust overnight, and the power of attorney was revoked. He argued, insisting notice was only received at 12:03 in the morning, but the rep stayed polite and immovable. They noted that he tried to make a transfer against a revoked authority, a detail that mattered far more than he understood. Calling a second time in front of everyone, he got the same answer. I watched his shoulders sag. When he turned around, the warm father was gone.
What did you do?
He hissed, crossing back to me. It was an accusation, not a question. I looked him in the eye. "I read the fine print," I told him. "You taught Sloan to smile, and you taught me to read. That was your mistake." Aunt Helen was already gathering her purse, done with the performance, quietly taking my side. My mother stopped crying because there was no longer an audience to buy it. Sloan, 16 and pale by the cake, looked at me like her whole world was turning inside out. The party was over. The case was starting. They filed the conservatorship petition anyway. Pride, not strategy. The court set an emergency hearing for 10 days later, and my lawyer, Bryn, was almost gleeful about it. "They're walking right into a probate courtroom to argue that you are incapacitated," Bryn told me, "and we get to respond. We spent those 10 days building our case, not hiding." Bryn filed a response opposing their petition and a motion challenging Curtis Vance for a major conflict of interest. He could not represent my parents against their own child after drafting the very power of attorney at the center of it. Patricia submitted the trust documents and an affidavit detailing the revocation timeline. Saul Berman prepared a sworn statement about my grandparents' clear intentions, their documented mental capacity, and the deep financial competence my grandfather had drilled into me since I was 12. I handed Bryn everything: the signed folder, the hidden power of attorney page, the exact dates. "Let them stand up in front of a judge," I told her, "and say out loud that I am too unwell to be trusted with my own money." Bryn grinned and said, "Oh, they will. And then we get to ask for their evidence." My father called once during those 10 days, late. His voice was scraped down to the bone. "You are tearing this family apart, Imogen." Looking out at the dark greenhouse in the yard, I told him, "I am not tearing the family apart, Dad. I am tearing your plan apart. Those are not the same thing." He hung up. I felt tired in a deep, structural way, like a building that survived a storm but is now noticing the strain. But I was not moving. When the court date arrived, my father caught me in the hallway of the courthouse before we went inside. He looked like he had not slept a single wink in the 10 days since my birthday party. His usual polished look was entirely gone, and his expensive suit hung loose on his frame. "It is not too late," he muttered. "Drop this. Let me manage the money quietly, and I will have the petition withdrawn. Nobody has to know." I finally understood what he was really begging for. It was not my forgiveness. It was my silence. He desperately needed my inheritance to cover a financial shortfall before the FINRA exam closed in. "How much is the whole, Dad?" I asked. He remained silent, which was all the answer I needed. $900,000, I said. His eyes flickered, and I knew Saul was right. "I am not giving you the money to cover what you took from your clients," I said. "And I am not staying quiet so you can steal from someone else next." His face hardened into something I almost felt sorry for. A man watching his last exit close. "You do this to your own father?" he asked. "You did this to your own daughter," I replied. "You assumed I would be too soft or too stupid to stop you. You spent 18 years deciding I was nobody." I grabbed my bag. Behind me, I heard my mother's sharp heels, my father's slow steps, and Curtis Vance muttering that this was all a misunderstanding as I walked into the courtroom. It was no misunderstanding. It was the most clearly I had ever seen my family. The heavy doors closed behind us, and a clerk called our case. The people who came to prove I was unfit to handle money sat down to argue their point in public. The courtroom was small and bright, lacking any television drama, which made it feel much colder. Curtis Vance spoke first because my parents insisted on going forward. He stood and painted me as a grieving, unstable young woman, prone to volatile outbursts and incapable of managing a multi-million-dollar inheritance. He used my mother's exact words: volatile, reckless, not herself. I sat very still beside my lawyer and let him build his entire house of cards. Then Bryn stood up. She was almost gentle about it, which is how I knew it was going to be brutal for them. She established that I was a competent adult with no medical history of incapacity, no treatment, and no diagnosis whatsoever. The entire claim rested solely on adjectives and my family's word. Then she turned to Curtis. "Counsel drafted a durable power of attorney for the respondent 4 months ago," she said, "obtained while she was a minor grieving her grandmother, buried in a folder of college paperwork. Now, counsel represents the petitioners, trying to seize the very assets that power of attorney was designed to reach. That is a severe conflict of interest, Your Honor, and arguably much worse." Curtis's face turned blotchy. Curtis started to object, but the judge waved him down. Then Bryn produced the single thing they had not planned for. "The petitioner's true motive is not protection," she said. "It is liquidity. My father's financial practice is under a FINRA examination for a $900,000 shortfall in client accounts, and he needed my inheritance to fill that hole before the audit closed." A murmur ran through the gallery, where I later learned a FINRA investigator had been sitting quietly since the morning. My father shot to his feet, shouting that it was a lie, his composure completely cracking. The judge looked at him coldly over her glasses. "Sit down, Mr. Trask," she said, before asking the only question that mattered.
Counsel, setting aside the adjectives, where is your actual evidence that this young woman is incapacitated? The judge asked. Show me a diagnosis, a medical opinion, or a documented inability to manage her affairs. Curtis nervously shuffled through papers that did not contain the answer. Your Honor, she is only 18 years old, he stammered. She has no professional experience. Being 18 is not a disability, and being inexperienced is not an incapacity, the judge snapped. I have read the trust. The assets are held by an independent professional trustee, so there is nothing for a conservator to manage anyway. She set the file down, looked directly at my parents, and her entire tone turned ice cold. What I see in this record is two parents who tricked their grieving child into signing a power of attorney and then filed an incapacity petition on her own birthday, the judge declared. This is a takeover, not protection. She denied it on the spot, scolding my parents for abusing the court. Then she delivered the line that changed everything. I am directing the clerk to refer this entire matter and the circumstances of that power of attorney to the district attorney's office. My mother gasped. Her theatrical performance deflated forever. My father just stared at the desk. Curtis Vance was already sweating, knowing that notarizing a fraudulent document and then suing the victim is a fast track to losing a law license. I did not gloat. I had promised myself I wouldn't, and truth be told, there was not a single part of me that wanted to. I just sat there, steady and calm, watching the massive machine my parents had built to destroy my life completely fall apart in a public courtroom. It was exactly what my grandfather used to tell me, that truth eventually gets decided in the open. Afterward, while our parents were still inside dealing with Curtis and the wreckage of their lives, Sloane found me in the hallway. She had sat through the entire hearing, looking far younger than her 16 years. In a small, trembling voice, she whispered, "They told me you were trying to take everything. They said you were greedy and did not care about us." I did not sugarcoat the truth for her, but I did not direct my anger at her either. I know they did, Sloane, I said. You were just a kid they handed a script to. That is on them, not you. She looked at the closed courtroom doors, then back at me. So the money was really yours? They left it to me because they trusted me, I told her, and because they knew Dad would try exactly this. I reached into my bag and pulled out the copy of our grandmother's final letter. Read this when you are ready, I said, holding it out. It is her real voice, not their version of her. Sloane took it with both hands like it might break. We did not cry, and we did not hug. 18 years of a wedge does not dissolve in a single hallway. Something shifted deep inside my sister Sloane that afternoon. A hairline fracture, spiderwebbing across the lie she had been raised to believe. For the first time in years, she did not look at me with suspicion, but as a sister. It was not a full reconciliation, but it was a fragile bridge of possibility, which was more than I had ever hoped to walk out of that courtroom with. When our parents emerged through those heavy doors, looking hollow and gray, Sloane took a slow step closer to me instead of them. Once that dam broke, the collapse came rapidly. The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority examiner, sitting in the gallery, had seen all he needed. The shortfall in my father's client accounts was real, and in just 6 weeks, he was barred from the securities industry for life. That lifetime bar meant his entire career was finished. The gold lettering on the glass door, the framed credentials,
Everything he built on a foundation of lies was gone. Worse for him, the fallout did not stop there. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened a civil investigation, while the district attorney began digging to see if the missing $900,000 crossed the line into outright theft. He hired a defense lawyer and finally stopped wearing his expensive suits because there was nowhere left to go. I did not celebrate his ruin. Honestly, it just made me sad to watch my own father dismantle his life, only to look around for a scapegoat, his eyes always landing on me. When he called me one last time, his voice was hollow. "I hope you are happy," he said. "I hope this is what you wanted." "It is not what I wanted, Dad," I told him. "It is simply what you did. You always mix those two things up." He did not have an answer, and I did not need one. The money he tried to steal from me was never the real danger. The danger was the financial crater he had dug for himself, the hole my inheritance was supposed to plug. If I had handed my legacy over, like they assumed I would, he would have just spent it and targeted someone else. But I refused. I did not hand it over, and so the floor he had been standing on for years finally collapsed right where he had hollowed it out. My mother's collapse was quieter, but far more absolute. She had built her entire identity on a flawless image, the devoted mother who held us together, praised by relatives at every single holiday. That fragile image of perfection could not survive the truth of a mother who tricked her grieving daughter into signing away her rights and then filed to have her declared incompetent on her own birthday. The district attorney's office opened an investigation, exactly as the judge had ordered. The relatives who had blindly nodded along at the gatherings did the math, realized the betrayal, and stopped calling. Aunt Helen, who had watched it all and spoke the only true sentence in that room, became the only family member I actually talked to now. Meanwhile, my mother sat alone in a house that had grown terribly silent around her. As for our family lawyer, Curtis Vance, he lost far more than just a client. My attorney, Bryn, filed a formal complaint against him with the state bar. A lawyer who notarizes a fraudulently obtained power of attorney and then litigates against the victim has crossed a line the bar takes very seriously. A disciplinary investigation was opened against him. For years, he had been the friend you called when you did not want a lawyer who asked questions. But those questions catch up to you in the end. None of them ever apologized. That is the closure people crave. The moment where those who hurt you admit their guilt. It never came, and I stopped waiting. I understood that waiting for an apology is just another way of letting them hold the pen. I had the trust, the truth on the record, and my sister coming back. I decided that was enough. I walked to the greenhouse. The Craftsman house was mine now, free and clear inside the trust. The first thing I did was carry my grandfather's heavy brass lamp back to his old desk, right where it belonged. Then, I walked to the greenhouse to check on the Meyer lemon tree, the one my grandmother grew from a cutting the year my father was born. It was thirsty, but not drowning. I watered it carefully. In the desk drawer, I found a letter in my grandfather's handwriting, the ink loops growing looser toward the bottom when he was tired. He wrote it years before his death, leaving it with Patricia to give to me when this was all over. He wrote that he watched my father his entire life learn to read people only for what he could extract, hoping he was wrong about where that would lead. He chose me to carry the trust, not because I was easy, but because he knew I was not. He wrote that he chose me because I was the only one in our family who asked whether the lemon tree needed water before asking what the house was worth. And at the very bottom, in the tiny print where he taught me the real story always lives, he had written a single line. You never needed permission. You only needed time. I sat in the soft green light for a long time. My grandmother used to tell me that a lemon tree does not ask permission to bloom. Yet I had spent 18 years in a house that demanded I ask for everything, to speak, to question, or to exist without apology. My grandfather had simply made sure that when the time came, I would have solid ground to stand on while I stopped asking. I folded up the letter. The tree was already budding. I left it to bloom on its own schedule. Patricia called me the following week to close all the remaining loops. The protective trust was completely airtight and permanent. The fraudulently obtained power of attorney was officially revoked and dead on the record. Best of all, the conservatorship was denied with prejudice, meaning my parents could not simply refile it next month. The investment portfolio, the Craftsman House, and the rental building on Delmare Street were safe under her trusteeship, with me as the sole beneficiary. The rental income from the Delmare building alone would cover my living expenses while I went back to school. Your grandparents structured this incredibly carefully, she told me. They thought about every single door. Then she mentioned one more detail as an afterthought. There is a separate education fund. Your grandfather opened a 529 college savings account for you when you were 12, she explained. And he seeded it with $50,000. It has been invested ever since, and it is at about $63,000 right now. I had to sit down. $63,000 my grandfather quietly tucked away from me when I was just a kid learning to read balance sheets at his desk? It was never mentioned, just growing. I enrolled at the State University that fall, majoring in finance and accounting because of course I did. I moved into the Craftsman House with the greenhouse and the brass lamp on the desk. Under that green light, I thought about how my father spent 20 years driving money into a hole, while my grandfather spent 12 years teaching me to read the bottom of the page. I clicked the brass lamp off, then on again, listening to the click. Then I got to work. Months later, I met my parents at a coffee shop on neutral ground. I had decided exactly how this would work, and I wanted to say it to their faces. They looked older than I remembered. My father's case was still grinding, and my mother had stopped pretending the relatives would come back. Once our coffee cups were on the table, I looked them in the eyes. "I am not here to punish you," I said. "I am not interested in that, but I am also not going to pretend that none of this happened." My mother began to protest, saying they only ever wanted what was best, but I stopped her, not unkindly. "Mom, you filed to have me declared incompetent. You told Sloan I was greedy. You went through my grief looking for a signature. I am not going to argue about whether you meant well," I continued. "I am simply telling you my terms." They both went silent. "If you want me in your lives, it has to be on honesty," I said. "No managing me, no fake version of me you sell to the relatives, and no asking me for money to fix what you broke. That is the door, and it is open. But you do not get to decide who I am to walk through it." My father stared at the table, while my mother's eyes welled with tears. For once, I could not tell if her tears were a performance, and I realized I no longer needed to know. "I will call you on Sundays," I said, standing. "We can try." It was not forgiveness, and it was not a reunion. It was a boundary with a door in it, which was more than they offered in 18 years, and exactly as much as I was willing to give. I left enough cash on the table to cover the 3 coffees and walked out into the warm afternoon. On a Sunday in early summer, Sloane came over to the Craftsman house, holding the letter I had given her in the courthouse hallway. She had clearly read it more than once. I could tell by the worn, soft edges of the paper. We sat together in the greenhouse, and she stared at the lemon tree and the brass lamp I had carried out to the potting bench. She looked up and said, "I am so sorry. I believed them." I told her the truth. "You were just a kid in a house that lied to you, Sloane. You believed the people who were supposed to be telling you the truth. That is not a crime. It is just the start of figuring out who actually was." She nodded slowly, turning the letter over in her hands. She said my grandmother sounded different here. Nothing like the bitter woman my mother described. I looked at her and said, "That is because this is actually her." We did not fix everything that afternoon. There were 16 years of being raised on opposite sides of a lie between us, and you cannot clear that in a single conversation inside a glass room. But she asked to come back, and I told her any time. I meant it, too. Before leaving, she helped me water the tree, carefully asking which leaves meant thirsty and which meant drowning. I showed her, just as I had been shown, in that warm room smelling of soil and citrus. It was the only part of my family that never asked me to be small. I still take my coffee to the greenhouse because it taught me the truth before I had the words. The lemon tree is much taller now, blooming only when it is ready. I did not win against my family. There is no real winning when the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones you had to protect yourself from. Nobody hands you a trophy for surviving your own household. But I kept the promise I made to my grandmother that I would never let anyone tell me who I was. I stood my ground on the land my grandfather made sure I would have, and I did it all without raising my voice once. My father only read people for their worth, collecting things until it left him with nothing. My grandfather, however, took the time to teach a 12-year-old child how to read the bottom of the page, and that left me with absolutely everything that mattered in this life. If you are listening and your family has decided you are the difficult, unstable one who cannot be trusted, let me tell you what I finally learned in that glass room. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself just to make them comfortable. The lemon tree does not ask permission to bloom, and I stopped asking too. I just made sure no one could ever cut my roots. That is my story. If it stirred something in you, anger, relief, or the quiet recognition of being underestimated, then it did its job. So let me ask, if you had to protect one thing from your own family, what would it be? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story, and check the description for more. I will see you there.